The snow fell hard from the sky. Thick white flakes covered the ground like a heavy blanket. The wind howled like a monster, shaking the old wooden huts of the alien village. Everyone had shut their doors. No one wanted to step outside. The storm was too strong, too cold, too dangerous. But she was outside. The alien mother held her arms close to her body. Her skin was turning blue from the cold. Her clothes were thin and torn. Her eyes were full of fear. She ran through the snow, shouting one name over and over, "Ranny! Ranny!" Her little boy was gone. She had only turned her back for a moment. Just one moment to light the fire inside. When she came out, her child was gone. Now she ran through the snow, sinking deep with each step. Her legs were shaking. Her breath came out in clouds. But she didn't stop. Her son was only 6 cycles old. He was small and weak. He wouldn't survive long in this storm. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, someone help me." But no one came. The village was silent. The doors were shut. The windows were covered. No one would help a poor alien widow and her child. They had always called her unlucky, cursed. No one wanted to speak to her, let alone step into the deadly storm for her son. Far away, through the blowing snow, something moved. A shape. A figure. It was not an alien. It was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing thick black clothing and a helmet that covered its face. A human. He had come to trade supplies with another village but got lost in the storm. His name was Davis. He had wandered for hours hoping to find shelter. His thermal scanner blinked and beeped. It was weak, but it showed a small heat signature nearby. Something or someone was alive ahead. Davis moved carefully, holding his arms out to balance on the icy ground. He followed the signal. Then, he heard it. A small cry. He turned his head quickly. There, near a half-buried snowdrift, a small figure lay curled up. It was a child. Thin arms wrapped around his chest. His lips were purple. His tiny body shook. He didn't move much, just cried softly. Davis didn't think. He ran to the boy. The snow reached his knees. Ice hit his face. But he kept moving. When he reached the child, he dropped to his knees and checked for breath. The boy was still alive. Barely. "Hey, kid," Davis said softly, even though the child couldn't understand his words. "You're gonna be okay, I've got you." He pulled the boy close to his chest and wrapped his warm jacket around him. The boy's skin was ice cold. His fingers were stiff. But Davis saw life in his eyes. He had to act fast. He looked around. There were no houses nearby. No shelter. The cold would kill both of them if they stayed here. Davis reached into his belt and pulled out a small flare. He fired it into the sky. It burst into red light. Far away, the alien mother saw the flare. Her eyes widened. She started running toward the light, tears freezing on her cheeks. Davis carried the child in both arms, pushing forward through the storm. Each step was harder than the last. His boots slipped. His legs burned. The cold was seeping through his gear, but he didn't stop. The child made a soft sound, a weak breath. That was enough. A few minutes later, Davis saw something in the snow, an old outpost. It looked broken but still had a roof. He kicked the door open and went inside. It was dark, cold, but it was better than outside. He laid the child on an old blanket. Then he turned on a small heater from his gear pack. Warm air filled the space slowly. He took off his gloves and rubbed the child's hands, trying to bring warmth back. The boy opened his eyes just a little. He whispered something in his alien language, a soft word. "Maybe Mama." Davis smiled. "She's coming," he said gently. "Hold on." Outside, the alien mother ran through the snow, following the flare's trail. Her feet bled, her eyes stung. But when she saw the light in the broken outpost window, hope filled her heart again. Her child was near. Frozen hands, warm heart. The storm still howled outside like a wild animal. Snow slammed against the old outpost walls. But inside, the human worked quickly. His hands moved fast, though they were turning red and numb. The alien child lay on a thin, dusty blanket. His skin was blue and cold. His small chest rose and fell slowly, barely alive. Davis, the human, gently rubbed the child's arms and hands. He had taken off his own coat to cover the child. He didn't care if he froze. What mattered now was saving this little life. He spoke softly, even though the child didn't understand. "Come on, kid, don't quit on me. You're tougher than this snow." He placed a heating patch on the boy's chest, then another on his feet. The old heater in the corner started to hum. The air inside the outpost warmed, but very slowly. It wasn't enough yet. Davis reached into his pack and pulled out a small water pouch. He poured a little into a tin cap, warmed it with his hands, and lifted it to the boy's lips. "Drink, just a little," he whispered. The child's lips moved. A drop went in. Then another. Outside, the alien mother stumbled through the storm. Her legs were weak. Her vision was blurred from snow and tears. But she had seen the red flare. She knew it wasn't far now. "Rennie!" she screamed, her voice shaking in the wind. "Please answer me." She saw a light ahead, a flicker through the storm. A building. Smoke? No. Steam. Warmth. Her heart jumped. Back in the outpost, Davis checked the scanner on his wrist. A second heat signal was approaching. He turned to the door and grabbed his tool blade, ready to defend himself if needed. But then, he heard a cry. A voice. High and broken. "Rennie." Davis froze. He opened the door slowly and stepped out, blade in hand. There, through the snow, a figure came running. Thin. Barefoot. Her eyes locked on him. She wasn't just anyone. She was the child's mother. "Stop," Davis shouted, but the woman didn't understand his words. She saw her child's coat around his shoulders. She saw blood on the snow. She screamed. She thought the human had hurt her son. She charged at him with shaking fists. Davis held up one hand and tried to speak calmly. "Wait. He's safe. He's inside." But she hit him. Weak punches, full of fear. She pushed past him and ran into the outpost. Her eyes went wide. There, on the floor, wrapped in warm cloth, her child moved. "Rennie," she gasped. She dropped to her knees and pulled the child into her arms. He made a soft sound. His tiny fingers touched her face. Tears ran down her cheeks. She kissed his forehead again and again. Davis stood near the door, breathing hard, still holding the blade. But now his face was soft. He watched her. She turned slowly. Her eyes, full of fear before, now held something else. Confusion. Then shame. She looked at the blade in his hand, then at his torn jacket, and at the blood on his knuckles, his own blood. She looked at the heater, the water cup, the empty food pack, and she understood. He had saved her son. She stood up slowly, holding her child close. Davis lowered the blade and stepped back. "I'm not your enemy," he said quietly. "I just couldn't leave him." The mother looked at him. She didn't know the words, but his voice, his eyes, his body language, they all told her the truth. She bowed her head, not in fear, but in thanks. Then, to Davis's surprise, she reached out. With shaking fingers, she touched his shoulder gently, the alien way of showing respect. Davis nodded. He stepped back inside and shut the door tight. The storm outside was still strong, but inside, something had changed. The child was safe. The mother was warm, and between them stood a human, a stranger, who had shown more kindness than anyone in their village ever had. The mother sat down beside the heater, holding her son tight. Davis placed another heating patch on the floor for them. No one spoke. But they didn't need to. For now, silence was enough. The shelter and the stranger. The ice storm roared outside like a furious beast. Wind slammed against the wooden walls of the broken outpost. Snow hissed through the cracks. But inside there was calm, warmth, soft breath, and 3 lives sitting together. Strangers, now connected by fate. The human, Davis, sat with his back to the wall, staring at the small alien child, now sleeping in his mother's arms. The boy's color had returned, no longer blue but soft lavender. His tiny chest rose and fell in a peaceful rhythm. Davis had stayed up all night. His body was tired, his eyes heavy. But he didn't let himself sleep. Not yet. He kept watch in case the storm worsened, or something worse came. Across the room, the alien mother sat quietly. She held her son close, wrapping her thin arms around him like a shield. Her clothes were still damp. Her hair was stuck to her face, but her eyes no longer held panic. Only questions. Who was this human? Why had he helped them? In her world, kindness was rare, especially towards someone like her. Her name was Ai. Her kind lived on the edge of the village, unwanted, ignored. They said she was cursed because her mate had died too young. Now she lived alone with her child. No one came near them. No one ever helped. Until now. She watched the human carefully. He had not touched her. He had not shouted. He had not demanded anything in return. He had only saved her son. Davis finally noticed her gaze. He raised one hand slowly and pointed at himself. Davis, he said gently. I blinked. Duh. Vis? He smiled and nodded. Then he pointed to her. She hesitated, unsure. But then softly she whispered, Ai. Davis repeated, Ai. That's beautiful. She didn't understand the words, but she heard the kindness in his voice. She gave a small nod. A moment passed. Then the child stirred. His eyes opened slowly. He looked up at his mother, then at Davis. For a second, he was confused. Then, he smiled. The same human who had carried him through the storm, who gave him warmth and water, was still here. The boy lifted one hand toward Davis. Davis leaned forward and gently touched it. Ai watched, her throat tight. Her son trusted this human. That meant something. The wind outside howled again. The outpost shook slightly. Davis stood up and checked the walls, tightening the seal near the window with scrap cloth. He moved with quiet skill. Ai watched in silence. He wasn't just kind, he was smart, strong, prepared. She looked down at her child. What would have happened if Davis hadn't been there? She didn't want to think about it. Suddenly a loud creak came from above. Davis turned fast, hand reaching for his blade. A beam had shifted in the ceiling. Ai jumped up, holding her son tightly. Davis moved quickly to support the wood with metal rods from his gear pack. He pressed hard, fixing the support with a tool. It held. Silence returned. Davis turned back. Ai was still staring at him, wide-eyed. He took a deep breath and said, Safe. We're safe now. He didn't know if she understood, but her shoulders relaxed slightly. He pointed to the small heater. More power, he said. Then food. He pulled out an energy bar from his bag and broke it into pieces. He handed one piece to Ai. She looked at it carefully, sniffed it, then gave it to her child first. The boy ate it quickly. Then she took a bite herself. Her hands shook, but she didn't stop. It was dry, strange, but warm in her belly. She looked up at Davis with quiet eyes. Thank you, she said slowly in her own language. He didn't understand the words, but he saw her expression. He gave a soft smile. You're welcome. Hours passed. The storm outside finally began to slow. The wind softened. The snow stopped falling. Davis stepped outside just for a moment. The white land was quiet now, calm, but danger still hid under the snow. Beasts sometimes hunted after storms, drawn by the smell of weakness. He looked at the horizon. They weren't safe yet. Inside, Ai wrapped her child in a thick blanket and whispered to him. Her voice was soft, gentle. Something about her had changed. She was no longer just a desperate mother. She was hopeful. And that scared her. She had learned long ago that hope led to heartbreak. But this human, he made her want to believe again. A mother's rage, a human's courage. The storm had passed, but the danger had not. The snow outside lay still and deep, hiding the frozen world beneath it. Silence ruled the land, broken only by the crack of shifting ice and the distant hollow cries of wild beasts. Inside the old outpost, warmth still lingered. The heater hummed softly. The human, Davis, sat near the door with his blade resting by his side. His head leaned against the wall, eyes closed, but he did not sleep. He was listening. Ai sat across from him, her son safe in her lap. The child's breathing was steady now. His small fingers held tightly onto her tunic even in sleep. Her own hands moved through his soft hair slowly, as if to remind herself he was still alive. But inside her chest, a storm still raged. She kept watching the human he had saved them. Yes, but why? A had grown up in a world where people only helped others for gain, status, coin, favor. Never for free. Never with no reason. She did not trust kindness. It was always a trap. Her mind whispered doubts. What if he wants to take the boy? Sell him? What if he's waiting for you to owe him something? Her heart ached with fear. She could not lose her son. Not now. Not after all this. Suddenly, outside the outpost, something moved. Snow crunched. Heavy. Slow. Davis opened his eyes. He stood quickly and went to the door silent. Aya froze, holding her child tighter. Davis pressed his ear to the door. Another sound, closer this time. A snort, a low growl. He looked back at Ai and made a flat motion with his hand. Stay low. She nodded, heart pounding. Davis opened the small window shutter, just a crack, and looked out. A creature stood in the snow. It was huge, like a bear mixed with a lizard. Thick fur, ice-covered horns, yellow eyes, a snow stalker. It sniffed the air. It had caught their scent. Ai stood up, ready to run. But Davis held up his hand again. No, he said firmly. We fight. She didn't understand the words, but his tone, his face, his calm, it held her in place. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small device. He clicked it once, and it began to beep slowly. A light flashed red. A trap. He looked at her, pointed at the far wall and then at the floor beneath it. He opened the floor hatch, an old supply hole. Ai got the message. She grabbed her son and crawled into the hatch. Davis placed a heater beside them and closed it halfway so they could still breathe. He turned back to the door. The beast growled louder now. It was just outside. Davis readied the blade in one hand and held the flashing device in the other. He opened the door slightly and threw the device into the snow. Beep, beep, beep. The beast snapped its head toward the sound. A second later, boom. Snow exploded into the air. The flash blinded the creature. It screamed in pain, but it wasn't dead. It charged. Davis stepped out and slashed at its side. The blade cut deep, but the beast was strong. It swiped at him with its claws. He ducked, rolled, stabbed again. Blood sprayed into the snow. Ai listened, from the hatch. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. Her child whimpered, sensing danger. Then, silence. A thud. Heavy. Final. The hatch creaked open. Ai crawled out. There in the snow stood Davis, covered in blood, panting, but alive. The beast lay dead behind him. He dropped his blade and fell too, one knee. Ai ran to him and caught his arm. She wasn't afraid now. She was shaking, but not from fear, from something else. Respect, gratitude, and something she never thought she'd feel for a human. Trust. She helped him back inside. He winced but nodded. She tore a strip from her own tunic and began cleaning his wounds. Davis watched her hands. She was careful, gentle, and for the first time, she looked into his eyes without fear. "Why?" she whispered, though she knew he wouldn't understand. "Why would you risk your life for mine?" He didn't speak. He just reached down and touched the boy's head. A quiet answer. Because no child should die cold and alone, and no mother should have to watch. I felt something deep in her chest crack open. Something old and painful. She blinked hard. Tears rolled down her cheeks, warm tears this time. Compassion. She had never seen it before. But now, here it was, in the eyes of a brave human. The beast in the ice, the fire burned low inside the outpost. The heater hummed quietly. The human, Davis, lay on the floor with bandages wrapped around his side. His breathing was slow, steady, but heavy with pain. EI sat beside him, holding her son close. Her hands trembled as she watched the human rest. Her child, Rennie, slept against her chest, warm and safe. Outside, the storm had calmed, but the cold had not left, and neither had the fear. The snowstalker was dead. But the howls had returned. EI had grown up hearing stories about the ice beasts that hunted in packs. If one fell, others would come. They followed. The blood. Followed the sound. Followed the smell of weakness. Davis sat up slowly and winced. EI moved to help, but he waved her off. He looked toward the boarded window, his eyes narrowing. Something was coming. He grabbed a metal rod from the floor and pointed at the wall. His voice was firm. "Reinforce this. Now." AI didn't know his words, but she understood the meaning. She stood quickly, placing Rennie on a blanket. Together they pushed broken crates and old shelves against the door and window. The sound of footsteps echoed outside. Heavy. Many. Davis checked his scanner. 4 signals, too big to be human, too quiet to be safe. He handed E a small red flare. He pointed at it, then toward the roof hatch. She shook her head. "No, not leaving you." He looked at her, then at Rennie. E's eyes filled with pain. She looked at her son, then back at Davis. She nodded slowly. If it came to it, she would escape with her son. But not yet. The building creaked. The wind blew strong again, but this time, it carried a different sound. Growling. Davis raised his blade and backed toward the wall. EI grabbed a pipe from the ground, holding it tight with both hands. Her arms shook. She had never fought before, but she would, for her son. Suddenly, crash. A window shattered. Snow flew into the room. A massive beast lunged through, bigger than the last. Its eyes glowed orange and its jaws dripped with saliva. E screamed and swung the pipe, striking its shoulder. The beast growled and turned to her. But Davis was faster. He jumped, slamming his blade into its side. Blood sprayed across the wall. The beast shrieked in pain. Then another one jumped through the roof hatch, and another through the door. They were surrounded. I pulled Rennie into her arms and rolled under a table. Davis fought like fire, sharp, fast, fearless. He slashed at one beast's legs, kicked another in the chest, and drove a metal rod through its throat. But he was only one man. I saw a beast crawling toward the table, toward her son. She didn't think. She ran. With a scream, she slammed the pipe into the beast's face once, twice, over and over. Blood covered her hands. Her body shook. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. The beast fell. Dead. E dropped the pipe, breathing hard. She looked at Davis, bloodied, limping, still standing. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Not words, not thanks, but fire. The last beast growled and charged. EI screamed. Davis grabbed a fuel cell from his pack, smashed it on the ground, and struck it with his blade. Boom! A blast of fire filled the room. The last beast was thrown against the wall. Its fur burned. It screamed, then went still. Silence. Smoke rose into the cold air. The outpost was nearly broken. The walls cracked, the floor burned. But the beasts were dead. All of them. Davis dropped to his knees, breathing hard. EI ran to him and helped him sit. Her hands were bloody, her face black with smoke, but her eyes were strong. "You saved us again," she whispered in her own language. He didn't understand, but he saw her face. He nodded once, then pointed to her. "You saved me." She looked down. She had fought. She had protected her child. She had stood beside a human in battle, and won. The fire in her chest did not fade. For the first time in her life, she felt powerful, and not alone. Her child crawled to them and hugged them both. The snow outside was still deep. The world was still cold, but inside this broken shelter, a warrior mother, a brave human, and a child who had seen both stand against the dark, together. Fire against the cold. The air inside the outpost was thick with smoke and silence. The snow. Beasts were dead. Their heavy bodies lay twisted across the broken floor. Blood had stained the walls. Pieces of shattered wood and melted metal lay everywhere. But they had survived. The child lived. The mother still stood. And the human, though bleeding and bruised, was still breathing. EI gently placed a blanket around Davis's shoulders. His eyes were closed, his lips cracked from cold and exhaustion. She knelt beside him, dipping a cloth into warm water and cleaning the cuts on his arms. Davis didn't move much. He had lost too much strength. But when she touched his skin, he opened one eye. Slowly. He smiled, weakly. He returned the smile without speaking. She didn't know the human word for thank you. But in her culture, healing someone meant you trusted them. And she did. More than anyone else she had ever met. Her son, Rini, sat close by. He held a small cup of warm soup, what was left of the dried supplies Davis had carried. It didn't taste good, but it was hot. That mattered. Outside, the snow had softened. The wind had died down, but it was still dangerous to leave. The cold was deep and sharp, and the trail back to the village was covered once again. They were trapped for now. But for the first time, none of them felt afraid. Not anymore. Davis sat up slowly, wincing as he moved. He looked around at the broken room, then at the beasts, then at AI. "You saved us," he said. She didn't understand his words, but his eyes were clear. She reached out and touched his chest, lightly, over his heart, then pointed to herself, then to Rennie, then back to Davis. Davis understood. "We saved each other," he said softly. E nodded. A soft quiet filled the air, the kind that comes after great storms, after war, after screaming, the kind of quiet that feels like peace. Rennie curled up between them and fell asleep quickly, one hand resting on Davis's leg, the other on his mother's arm. EI laid her head back, against the wall, closing her eyes for the first time in days. Her fingers lightly brushed her child's hair. Then gently she placed her hand on Davis's arm. She didn't know why, but it felt right. Not romantic, not owed, just safe. Like two survivors who had stood at the edge of death and pulled each other back. The heater in the corner hummed low, the fire crackled. Warm light danced across their tired faces. Davis took out the last item from his gear pouch, a small recording device. He clicked it on. A blue light blinked. "This is Davis R. Holloway," he said into it, voice raspy. "Mission update. Lost. In Sector 12B during blizzard. Found shelter. Met locals. Situation unstable, but changing." He looked at AE and smiled. "I found something I didn't expect. Someone. Two someones." He clicked the device off. I tilted her head, curious. He shook the small machine and offered it to her. She took it and stared at the blinking light. Then she looked up. "Home?" she asked, unsure. Davis nodded. "Home," he repeated. She smiled. softly, and whispered something in her own tongue. It meant, "Home is where the fire is warm, and hearts are not afraid." The next morning, sunlight finally touched the snow. The blizzard had passed fully. Far in the distance, smoke from village fires could be seen again. They could return now. But something had changed. This wasn't just about getting back. It was about who would be returning. Not a frightened alien mother, not a lost human trader, not a sick child, but something more. A team, a bond, a beginning. EI stood first. She lifted her child onto her hip and turned to Davis, who struggled to his feet. She reached out her hand. He took it. They stepped out into the cold together, not as strangers, but as something much closer to family. She had never seen compassion. Before the snow crunched beneath their feet as the three of them walked, EI held her son close. His small hands were tucked beneath her coat. Davis walked beside them, one arm wrapped in cloth, his steps slow but steady. The cold air bit at their faces, but the storm was over. For now, there was only quiet. A few birds flew overhead. The trees were dusted white. The path back to the village was covered in snow, but Davis's scanner showed the way. It had taken them 2 days to regain the strength to move. 2 days of fire, of warmth, of sharing food and silence, of looking at each other and not seeing. Alien, stranger, or outsider. Just life. Just people who chose to save each other. The village was close now. He slowed down as the rooftops came into view. Her heart began to race. Not from joy, from fear. She had lived in that village for years but never belonged. She remembered the stares, the whispers, the way people crossed the road to avoid her, the way they said she brought bad luck because her mate had died. Because she lived poor, alone. They had shut their doors when she screamed for help. Would they shut them again? Davis noticed her worry. He looked at her and pointed toward the village. Then he pointed at his chest. "I'm with you," he said. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the meaning. She gave a slow nod. They walked the rest of the way together. When they reached the edge of the village, people began to gather. Doors opened, heads peeked out. Some pointed. Some gasped. They saw the human first, bloody coat, wrapped arm, dark eyes. Then they saw Ae, and then the child. Alive. Whispers rose. She came back. With the child. Who's that man? Ae stood tall. She stepped forward, holding her son high for all to see. "My child lives," she said in her own tongue, voice steady. "And a human saved him." The elders came out. One of them, old and sharp-eyed, stepped forward. "No one saves for free," the elder said coldly. "What does he want?" Davis didn't answer. He simply knelt beside the child and gave him a small smile. Then he pulled something from his coat pocket, a tiny carved figure, a gift. He placed it in the boy's hands, then stood up and turned to walk away. I reached for him, but the elder stopped her. "You would defend him?" the elder asked. Ai's voice rose. "Yes." They had never heard her speak so clearly, so boldly. "You turned away when I begged for help. You shut your doors." This human, this stranger, opened his arms. He gave warmth, food, blood, everything, and asked for nothing. The crowd grew quiet. She stepped beside Davis and took his hand. Her child reached up and held the human's sleeve. The villagers looked on, some ashamed, some curious, some still cold. But then, a small hand reached out. A little girl stepped from the crowd and walked up to Rennie. She smiled and held out a piece of bread. Rennie took it shyly. The human nodded. More children stepped forward. Then adults, one by one. Not all, but enough. They brought blankets, food, tools, apologies. No one had expected this. No one had expected a human to show them what they had forgotten. Compassion. The elder watched with a frown, but said nothing more. Later, that night, a fire burned in the center of the village. E sat with her son wrapped in her arms. Davis sat nearby, his arm finally bandaged well. Villagers gathered around listening to the story. Not a story of war, not of power, but of kindness, the kind that crossed species, the kind that saved lives, the kind that changed hearts. A young boy tugged at Davis's coat. "Will you stay?" The boy asked. Davis looked at A.E. She didn't speak. She only reached out and took his hand again. This time, he didn't let go, and for the first time in her life, A.E. saw what true compassion looked like. It didn't roar like fire. It didn't shine like gold. It came quiet, gentle, in a warm hand, in a brave heart, in the eyes of a man who saw worth in someone the world had thrown away.